Welcome to Gazali at the Prudent Media. We have a very illustrious guest today, Ambassador TCA Raghavan, who's recently taken over as the Director General of the Indian Council of World Affairs, which is one of the premier think tanks on India's foreign policy and international relations issues. Ambassador Raghavan has a very illustrious background in his capacity as a highly decorated Foreign Service officer, and he retired as India's High Commissioner to Islamabad in the year 2015. We also know him as a diplomat scholar, having engaged deeply in academics, history, foreign policy through his writings. He holds a doctorate in history from Jawaharlal Nehru University, and also has recently come out with a book on India and Pakistan. So in this interaction, we hope to cover a variety of issues ranging from the contemporary context of Indo-Pak relations to the systemic issues, and finally, issues relating to his book. So welcome, Ambassador Raghavan.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's been a pleasure having you here.
Thank you.
A very natural question that comes to our mind today is looking at the current state of Indo-Pak relations, particularly with the new Prime Minister, Imran Khan, coming to power, and the kind of expectations and the apprehensions he has given rise to. So your views on the current scenario in terms of the new government?
Well, in India-Pakistan relations, you can always take either a strategically optimistic view or a strategically pessimistic view. The optimistic view is that you have a new government following an election in Pakistan, which, despite the fact that India-Pakistan relations went through a very difficult patch in the last 2 years, India itself was not a factor in that election. It was fought principally on internal Pakistan issues, and the initial statements made by Prime Minister Imran Khan were positive, and they were also reciprocated by our leadership. So that is an optimistic view that it's a good start, and now we have to see how things will develop. But at the same time, with Pakistan, we cannot be blind to what has happened in the past, or the structural issues or the systemic issues, as you referred to, in India-Pakistan relations, because as a victim of groups and activities which emerge from Pakistan, we have to be mindful of that particular history and cannot afford to be too optimistic.
So more specifically with regard to Imran Khan, and you were the High Commissioner at a time when there was a lot of political churning in Pakistan. Would Imran Khan be able to act on his own? I mean, the general perception is that the military also would have a certain role to play. But given the larger dynamics of the crisis that Pakistan finds itself in today, how do you look at the ability of the new Prime Minister to conduct himself?
Well, it's very clear. Imran Khan came to power or won the election because of a combination of circumstances. And the most important of those was the fact that Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, despite the very strong mandate he had and the charisma and the popular support he had, was not able to manage the civil-military equation. And the frictions in the civil-military equation led finally to his downfall. So I think everyone in Pakistan is aware of that history, and more than anyone else, Mr. Imran Khan is aware of that history. So his first priority will certainly be to see that he does not develop the same kind of friction with the Pakistan military. Now, is that necessarily something which means that nothing can happen with India? There are different views, but in my view, no. It doesn't mean that because there's going to be a smoother military-civilian interface, it doesn't mean that relations with India will remain static.
And when you talk about Imran Khan, cricket can hardly be left behind. And we had our own Mr. Sidhu going over to Pakistan and, true to his style, hugging the army chief. Of course, a lot of it is atmospherics, but there has been a political repercussion here in India. Now, in terms of India's initial response, and I think officially the Prime Minister has said that well, the room is always open for a kind of an engagement. And the MEA was quick to issue a clarification when Pakistan said that, see, this is what we have been saying. So, I mean, the follow-up, how have we handled post Imran?
Well, I think the Prime Minister, the Ministry of External Affairs initially made a statement welcoming the election. Thereafter, the Prime Minister spoke to Mr. Imran Khan on the phone, and then there was a formal letter of congratulations after his swearing in. So, these are, to some extent, these are conventional, customary protocol requirements. But at the same time, they also suggest that, like our Foreign Minister, Srimati Sushma Swaraj had said very, very precisely, that in diplomacy, there are never any full stops. You have all the other punctuation marks, but you don't have full stops. So I would say that India-Pakistan relations, that is the approach to take, that it is not as if one phase is going to be permanent and is going to go on forever. There will inevitably be changes.
So the hug diplomacy by Mr. Sidhu can be condoned to that extent.
I think, in India-Pakistan interactions, especially when they take place after a long time, this kind of atmospherics always arise. So I would not read too much into it either way. He is a friend and a former cricketing colleague of Imran Khan, so he went. It's a good thing.
I would now like to bring your attention to some issues which are more systemic in nature. And I mean, having been a scholar of history, who knows it better than you that when it comes to Indo-Pak relations, it's also a legacy of history. And one perception has been that come what may, you cannot expect a tangential breakthrough in Indo-Pak relations. There is a cyclical view that you will have periods of highs, periods of low. So in that sense, if at all we were to think of engaging with Pakistan, what do you think India's policy priorities should be? I mean, at the moment we have maintained a very, very firm stand, but at some point of time, do you think we should be accommodative enough of several other factors, external factors included? So how do you look at the issue from a long term?
I think from the fact is that where national security issues are concerned, all countries behave in the same way. So the fact that we had to take a firm stand is not in itself surprising, because on national security issues, no country can be accommodative. Because the national security issues, especially because of the situation on the LOC terrorist attacks, that came to prominence in the way they did in 2015, 2016 especially, there was no way that could have been, that issue could not be faced head on. So I think this primary fact that no country can allow national security issues to be compromised on, that will remain as a fundamental principle. But having said that, I think there is a lot of scope to do other things. But clearly, it depends a great deal on Pakistan too. And not so much on Pakistan wants to do vis-a-vis India, but on the state of internal stability in Pakistan. One of the reasons why we were unable to make progress in 2014 and 2015 was because the political system in Pakistan and by political system I mean the whole political system in terms of the military leadership, the civilian leadership, they were not able to come together. And they were totally engrossed in their own frictions and contestations. And India-Pakistan relations became a casualty of that contestation. So if there is more internal coherence in Pakistan, I would say that things would be, certainly will improve in India-Pakistan relations too.
Now, another very significant thing which connects us to this interview now is that Mr. Kuldeep Nair, who was considered as a champion of Indo-Pak peace, died recently. And he was also perhaps one of the very, very important elements of what used to be at one point of time track to diplomacy, people-to-people's contacts. Now, one dilemma that India has always faced vis-a-vis Pakistan is that whom do you actually negotiate with? Do you talk to the political elite in Pakistan, the government in Pakistan? Do you talk to the military establishment? or do you directly relate to the civil society? At one point of time, we said that people to people contact should be encouraged. Now, there were phases when each of these were emphasized to a certain extent, but then apparently it comes down to the same situation. So whom should India talk to in Pakistan? That becomes a very, very important question. And how do you look at it?
Well, you're quite right to bring up Mr. Kuldeep Nair. He had anyone who has dealt with Pakistan knew him, and he himself had a very long association with Pakistan. He came from Sialkot, and at the time of partition, he was a young man, and he started working as a journalist in Delhi. But what is interesting about him is at a time when people were not really at the civil society level, not really thinking about Pakistan, because the trauma of partition was too fresh. He kept up his engagement, and he was going to Pakistan to visit his town, to hometown, to visit friends throughout from the 50s, 60s, 70s. So he that way had a very good intuitive understanding of what was happening in Pakistan. How we should approach it, as you say, our policy is not based on a single track. It may appear to be at certain points of time, but overall it's not based on a single track. It's based on a combination of that you engage with whoever is ready to engage with you, and you deal with whoever is in charge or whoever appears to be in charge, because you have no option but to deal with the person who is constitutionally and legally the elected or the appointed government. The problem arises not so much with what one institution wants or what the military wants. The problem arises when there is internal contestation in Pakistan. So it's when the military has been totally in charge, you have had very positive dealings with them on occasion. Similar Musharraf years, earlier the Indus Waters Treaty was signed during Ayub Khan's time. Even in General Zia's tenure, although the relations were going through a very, very difficult patch, but a great deal was done to see that they remained broadly on course. It's often forgotten General Zia made 5 visits to India without there ever being a reciprocal visit from India. So it's not as if you cannot you cannot have any engagement or you cannot have a relationship with the military. Similarly, with civilian leaders, you have had very good relations with Benazir Bhutto, with Nawaz Sharif, and so on. I think the problem arises because the civil-military contestation sucks so much of the oxygen out of Pakistan that it leaves very little space to do anything else. And that is really the issue which we have faced.
But wouldn't you say that, the spread of radical extremism has opened a third front, and even though with civilian and military establishment you could have certain stakeholders you could negotiate with, radical extremism in Pakistan has created a constituency which may have an overbearing impact on these two?
Well, so far it does not appear that radical extremist groups have an overbearing role to play in Pakistan. They have a certain limited role, and within that they play that role, but it's not as if they have a over-determining factor or an overbearing factor in Pakistan politics today. Even in this election, the extremist and religious parties did not perform well. The problem for us is not so much what is happening in Pakistan internally in terms of religious parties coming to the fore or religious combinations putting up candidates. The problem for us is the use of extremist groups which have been radicalized, and they are used as an instrument by Pakistan intelligence agencies for their policy objectives vis-a-vis India. So we have a very specific issue with Pakistan with regard to extremist groups. We are not talking about the role of religion in politics in Pakistan in general, because that is an issue they have to confront. We are talking about the use of extremist groups by intelligence agencies, and that is something which we have. That is a conclusion which we have come to after 20 years of experience of studying that phenomena very closely.
I would now like to come to your book, which was released last year and has been very well received, People Next Door. What inspired you to write that book, and tell us something about the major actors, instances that you've highlighted in that book?
Well, I wrote the book because my publishers approached me that why don't you write a book on the 70th anniversary of 1947 in 2017. Now, I didn't want to write about myself and Pakistan because that kind of book has very little readability. At the same time, I didn't want to write about India-Pakistan relations because enough has been written on it. So I looked at India-Pakistan history through the eyes of people who were involved in the making of that history at different points of time. So, and I was lucky that so many of them have written. They have personal papers, memoirs, autobiographies, biographies. So these are, there are many diplomats, of course, because being a former diplomat, I turned naturally to that constituency. But there are also writers, artists, filmmakers, journalists, politicians, military officers on both sides. So, and my view was to try to see as to how history or the same set of facts can be seen so differently by people in India and Pakistan. And virtually any episode of India-Pakistan history, if you see, you will find that there are differing views of it, of the same set of facts.
Could you give some examples, some interesting examples that came out based on your personal interactions?
I discovered very interesting characters in the course of this, of writing this book. I mean, for instance, we often tend to forget now how close was the relationship between the political class and civil servants and diplomats and military officers on both sides through the 50s, 60s and 70s. Because they had all come up from the same catchment area, they had been recruited on a similar basis, and there were very strong personal relationships. And then they found themselves taking adversarial positions. And that was, for instance, the Kutch Agreement, which was signed in 1965 after a brief border skirmish, was signed by the Pakistan High Commissioner in Delhi and a secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs. And these two were brothers-in-law and cousins. And there are many such examples. During Simla, many of the people from both delegations knew each other for a very long time, not just because they had been dealing with each other, but because they had earlier pre-1947 relationships. So how, despite that very good understanding and knowledge and friendship with each other, certain issues could not be you could not make progress on certain issues is something which interested me. And I tried to bring that out in the book, that just knowledge of each other or friendship is not often adequate to dealing with difficult interstate issues. It may seem commonplace enough, but it's actually very interesting, because then you see as to the reason why India-Pakistan relations draws so much passion and often are so poignant, that despite the best of efforts on both sides, you are often unable to make progress.
Distant neighbors, as you could say. That brings out a very, very interesting point. We now have a generation of now scholars, even politicians, bureaucrats, who would not have any memories of the 1947 era. And therefore, they would not look at Indo-Pak relations through the prism of that emotional attachment, historical legacy. So I mean, Kuldeep Nair passing away, in a way, shows a passing of an era. So now that both the countries are confronting a generation which has seen the two sides perennially at conflict with each other, rather than a common historical legacy, do you think that there is a possibility of a new opportunity emerging? Because this generation would not carry the baggages of past, look at the future, and then maybe that's where the silver lining could come through, or it's the other way around.
Well, I think there are many reasons to be pessimistic. I mean, apart from the generational factor is important, but apart from the generational factor, there are wider changes taking place. And a lot will depend on how these changes continue to develop. And for instance, one important change which has been in place for the last 10-15 years are the forces of globalization. Now that has a big impact. For instance, India and Pakistan may not play cricket bilaterally, but you have to do so in multilateral formats. So your militaries may not engage with each other on a bilateral basis. But I read today that there is a joint exercise because there is the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Program, and in that the Indian and Pakistan militaries will take place, will both be participating. So this is really a subset of the power of globalization. And there are many, many examples of this. It's not a new phenomena. It's not as if it is something which is going to have a dramatic policy impact immediately. But it will over a period of time. I mean, one reason I say so is because if you talk to military officers on both sides who have served together in UN peacekeeping missions, you find their attitude to each other is much more rounded. While certainly the other is seen as an adversary, which an adversarial relationship definitely exists, but it is also not seen as a relationship without hope because of this experience of working together. So globalization is an important factor. The second important factor is technology. In the 50s, 60s and 70s or 80s, even in the 90s, a perennial item of discussion used to be that if we allow each other's media products to flow freely, then people will have a better knowledge of each other and it will help in better understanding. Now that debate is history because media products don't need to flow. They flow on their own across the World Wide Web. So technology is a great enabler. It has its downsides too. But the fact is it's a great enabler. And then thirdly, it is the economic changes. I mean, in Pakistan we saw Indian movies were banned in 1965. And the ban was lifted in 2005, some 40 years later, not because of anything else, but because Pakistan cinema owners, multiplex owners, realized that the only way the industry can survive is if Bollywood films are shown in it. So I think the powers of economy, of globalization and of technology will play a certain role in molding the relationship, and that gives grounds for some optimism.
One final question, Ambassador. How difficult or how interesting was it to be an Indian in Pakistan? So could you tell us about some of your interesting experiences as an Indian on the streets of Pakistan?
I lived in Pakistan for over 7 years in two stretches.
Okay.
The first time between 2003 and 2007, and the second time between 2013 and end of 2015. And I found it personally a very interesting experience because, as I said, you realize that you're looking at yourself in a mirror. And there are many issues on which Pakistanis and Indians have a diametrically opposite view. In India, most people view partition as a great tragedy, which should not have happened. And it was, they may have different views on whether it was avoidable or not avoidable, but they see it as a tragedy, that it did not solve any problems. Most people in Pakistan would see partition as freedom. So beginning from that, there are many, many other issues on which we have totally different views. So as I said, it's like seeing yourself on a mirror, and it's intellectually an exercise which stretches you. And that is what I found so unusual in Pakistan, unlike being in other countries.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. It has been wonderful
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, and I'm very grateful to have been invited to.
So look forward to having you again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.